I'm going to acknowledge two members of our management staff who are here. I know that's not why they're here. Professor Nelson, who is our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic, Prof. Welcome. And somebody who's recently joined the institution, Ms Vuyo with HR, who is with us. Welcome, Ms Zandi, and welcome to the institution as well. So today we are interrogating, we are here to learn, we're here to unlearn, we're here to absorb and take whatever we get from today's interactions and take to our respective spaces. The topic is Thinking Through Erasure on Being a Woman, Feminism, Protest and Democracy, with a subtitle, Dismantling the Gap Between Gender and Democracy. But before we feel welcome, before Sekuli Baki Zetu, I'm going to ask Usivu from Canada to do an official work. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. As introduced, I'm Sibu. I'm currently the Canada intern. So mine's very simple today. It's just to open, welcome engagement. And I think this is very important as we come from total shutdown throughout the country, as it is Women's Month, noting it is also Diversity Month within the institution, noting that a roadmap needs to be set, noting the importance of gender and women emancipation, interrogating certain questions, and also introspecting ourselves, not only as men, but as women as ourselves, calling each other out. So this is for me just to say, may we learn, unlearn, create safe space, and not have triggering and harmful content. So just from us as Canada, we welcome you. And by the way, we note the magic that is up at the front. Women from all spaces, different features, different things, but the credentials that just go with it. And also to our Deputy Director, who will be facilitating to us. I said, what are your credentials? And she's like, no, please don't say it. That's when you know we've got proper credentials. So, and might I just add, she's the creme de la creme, getting her that your program is worth it. So, I give it to the floor, the facilitator, and the guest. Manasman. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Steve. So, my name is Vuyo Bongela. I am employed in the institution as a deputy director in the advertising and branding session. But here, for my sins of learning to speak and to, as Prof. Zin will say, getting deeper in what you think you can't talk about is that which you really need to talk about. I find myself here today. So we hope we're going to, as Steve will say, this is a safe space. Everyone's voice and view is welcome. But I hope you will walk out, if the conversation is not uncomfortable, it doesn't challenge your prejudices, it doesn't challenge what you think you know, and what you think you know, as a space of conbayas and learn, I've got nothing to learn, and I'm hoping that you will walk away actually having learned and unlearned something. So at this moment, I would like to give it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, because I wouldn't do justice. And in the introduction, I would like for them to say where they come from and how they would be, because obviously they're coming from different spaces, different, they're wearing different hats, and they would be offering to us today from the spaces that they occupy. So, okay, we'll start from that side. Sorry, Zandi, I know you don't want to start, but you know.
Okay. Do I need to get closer to the mic?
You can hear us.
Mulweni? Hi, Eastern Cape. Hi. Igama lami nguZandi wakwa Radebe. Umthimkhulu ubhungane undlebento zombini umashama usigoloze sibuka umlungu simjamele. Like she said, we wear many hats because we are different people at different times. Right now I am Zandi Radebe, a student and an academic at UNISA. I am a black academic, not an academic who happens to be black. I want to place emphasis on that because it carries a lot of meaning for me. And I also come from the Black Consciousness Pan-Africanist space. I am an activist, or what we call a decolonial activist scholar. In other words, the thoughts that I write are tested and corrected on the ground and the other way around. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Zandi. So you'll be offering your views from that space.
And many other spaces that might be triggered as I'm journeying in this conversation.
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, I'm Molweni. Igama ngu Asonele Phiri, a second-year student at Rhodes University. I'm a black trans artivist, not activist, artivist. So what that means is that activism through art and art through activism. So there should be that engagement between the two. One thing that I can say is that from my perspective, I'll be giving from my perspective as a trans woman who comes from Rhodes University, a white institution as such. Like I'm open for anything that you can consider trigger warning. And if I'm about to say something that like is offline and whatsoever, I will put a trigger warning to it. As much as people are saying it's a safe space, I would love the audience members to actually question themselves of what a safe space is. So let's not just sit in this room and say it's a safe space, but we need to understand what a safe space is.
Thank you very much. Face on to the university.
Good evening. Dumelang Sanbonani. My name is Brightness Mangolothi. I'm a lecturer at Nelson Mandela University, a former chairperson of NEHAU. I was also an HOD for Public Relations and Communication Studies Department. I think I've held many hats. And with the experience that I've acquired, I will be sharing my experience, not just as an academic, but also as a woman, and also as a student, because I'm a lifelong learner. But also to actually share that they say your PhD, you don't have the PhD until you walk on the stage. So I've submitted my PhD. But I am also going to use this opportunity to actually reflect on some of my findings, because the research that I was doing was workplace bullying in higher education and focusing on the experiences of women academics in higher education. So that on its own, it actually doesn't only reflect on the experiences of academics, but it also talks about the interaction between academics, amongst the academics, but also academics and the students. So as much as we can say students are oppressed, but students also have a role of oppressing academics. And the same goes also with academics oppressing students.
I did warn Brightness that, Maz, so we say intro. Sam?
Oh, you covered. You covered. Okay. Hello everyone. My name is Sam. It's good to be here. I don't want to make it too long. I prefer the actual discussions and engagements. But one thing I would say from my side is that
What will you be offering from?
Yes,
from a standpoint, the many hats that you wear.
Sure.
What can you expect today?
Okay, well, I think for myself, I do interact with different folk in different spaces, and they really are diverse spaces. So, but I think in this particular instance, and also just looking at the panel itself, what it's comprised of, who it's comprised of rather, because it has an identity or multiple identities. I think for myself, I would look at a governance perspective, so what it means for women in particular and gender non-conforming folk to be in politics and to be in government. And also, I do want to problematize who or what an activist is and who or what gets to define who or what an activist is. Finally, The second last point I do want to look at, because there is a bit of intersectionality, is that I'm not just a female or a so-called woman, but I am a young person. So ageism is a very real construct, and young females face certain things that females of age don't necessarily face. And in fact, there are instances where females of age are the very perpetrators of the experiences that young females experience every day. So I want to look at that. And finally, this is where I do get, this is where, for example, any one of yourselves in the audience do get to problematize myself as a young white female South African. And I'm very open and honest about that in any engagement that I have, that I come with the multiple constructs or identities attached to me. So in as much as I am a female, I'm also white, and that is something to be problematized, not with respect to my personhood as an individual, but with what comes attached to me based on this particular skin color. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
About a couple of weeks ago, Alan says to me, looks like an interesting lineup. It's going to be interesting, a group of quite strong women in the panel and a facilitator. So I can see Alan, they are, but I'm going to try and rein them in. So, to quote Prof. Puleng Sekgalo in her article, Gender, Social Cohesion and Everyday Struggles in South Africa, just to open up a conversation, she says, this conversation aims to explore the concepts of gender, power and sexuality in post-apartheid South Africa, the complications of everyday life, and an intersectional feminist, or as someone who has multiple oppressions to deal with daily. So, to my panel members, I'm going to offer you 10 minutes each. Looking at the topic, thinking through erasure, which is deletion, eradication. Hello. Sorry, I'm going to embarrass you. Welcome. The fifth member of our panel members, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, Musa, I'm going to put you in the spotlight, and I'm going to wait for you to sit down. I can organize one for you, trust me. Please take a seat. Welcome. The flight was delayed, ladies and gentlemen, and she's not the pilot. So welcome. So we've already introduced ourselves. So I'd like you to introduce yourself. And where you're from and where will you be offering, obviously the multiple hats that you wear. Today, your response to the questions, your response to the audience, from what standpoint you will be offering from.
Okay, cool. So, my name is Musa Gwebani. I've been struggling a lot lately to talk about what it is that I do, who I am. And I've really settled on land activist because I think that's what I do most of the time. So, most of my work is around informal settlements in Cape Town. So looking at safety and security of informal settlements, looking at security of tenure of informal settlements. So that just means the right to not be evicted arbitrarily. Looking particularly, what does that mean for women? When we talk about the land and the land conversation, what does that mean for women? There's a particular dispossession in South Africa that is particular only and can only affect women. So for instance, if you're on the RDP list and you get a house with your husband and your husband beats you, then you have nowhere else to go and you're forced into an occupation. Or if you're evicted and the police come and crash into your house. I had 3 women who were like induced into premature labor because of they were being illegally evicted out of their house. So there are particular circumstances and particular dispositions that affect women. And that's the kind of work that I do. And also linked to that is just safety in informal settlements. It's just how there are no streetlights in informal settlements and the police never arrive, and linking that really to gender-based violence, which is also trying to untangle the system. What does the system look like for women? How do you get a protection order? How do you get a restraining order? What is that? What is a peace order? What are the various ways that I can protect myself in terms of the law in making sure that I'm safe? So a very big land focus, but So zooming in on feminism and zooming in on how do these various issues affect women primarily and in their respective roles. So today what we're speaking about, right, is women in democracy. And perhaps what my offering is just trying to look at a continental reach. I think in the last 60 years, in South Africa being in the last 25 years, we've seen a democratization of Africa. Sorry, I don't know how long other people were, so I'm just going I was just like, what are you offering today? Oh, okay. I was just supposed to say my name.
Yes. Wow. Now we know.
Okay, great.
So, anyone can start. In the topic of erasure, on being a woman, feminism, Protestant democracy, I'm going to start that, and then after we've offered and we've gone to the audience for their responses and questions, then we'll take it to the subheading, dismantling the gap between gender and democracy. So anyone can start. Your understanding of the topic and how it pertains to the space that you're in, and your struggles, because I'm very aware, colleagues, that even if we call ourselves feminists, there are some who think they are the principals or the head girls or the I know better than the next person kind of vibe amongst ourselves. So I'm hoping that you are sitting there from a perspective of I know nothing. My slate is blank. So that you open your heart, you open your mind, and hopefully your hands and feet will follow what you've learned today. So I'm hoping from where you are, from where you're standing, well, you're seated, but you will listen from that perspective because, we have that kind of vibe about ourselves. So we have, as you heard from the introduction, we have Richman, and I'm actually wondering, about 2 hours, is it enough now? But we respect your time. So and please note your questions. I'm going to allow our panelists to finish what they're saying, and I'm going to come back to you. Should there be anything that I feel is yellow, I'll come back to them. Anyone can go first. Your understanding of the topic, or your experience of erasure, because I think most importantly it does come to tabling and wanting to erase your identity in the very space you're in. So we'll listen.
Can I begin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone can go first.
Firstly, I erased myself when I was introducing myself. I erased myself because I had to say as a trans woman and not as a woman, right? Sure. And that's a label that I feel like itself needs to be worked on. So you get a lot of people that are saying to you, okay, within transness you'll find that there are people that are passing and people that are failing. So with me, because I'm a writer as well, when I wrote a script called Pass or Fail, it was based on the fact that you will find that I have to wear makeup for me to pass as a woman. If I don't wear makeup, in a lecture room I'm erased. In a lecture room I'm misgendered. And when I speak about it, they'll be like, the thing that's between your legs is what matters, right? So something that also bothers me a lot is what I call the birth certificate, right? It holds a title in my life. Sure. That's something that actually I was born as male, but identify as a woman, right? But moving forward, I want us to have this conversation of what is a woman? What constitutes a woman, right? So I'm sitting here and I'm a panel full of women and everything. And knowing that we have to replace the A with an X in order to say that, you know what, we're inclusive. Are we really inclusive? Yesterday was the total shutdown. I could not attend the total shutdown because of the space that it was full of cisgender women who are erasing a trans woman. Listen to that again. Yeah. I have to say a trans woman and not say woman, black women erasing other black women. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the problem is. A lot of people don't want to have this conversation, and I was having a conversation with Sisi Apa on our way here, that you know what, there is a family division. women are not having a conversation. We are not sitting down. We are talking about oppression, but we're oppressing each other. So we cannot be preaching that, you know what, yesterday we spoke about gender non-conforming. Who is the gender police? Who can say someone is gender non-conforming and is gender non-conforming? So we need to look at that perspective as well. So when I say I am trans, I have to wear breasts, I have to have this, I have to have that, in order for you to believe that I am trans. But a cisgender woman passing, they don't have to wear anything in order for them to say they are women, right? So we need to be having a conversation based on that. And me as a person who's been erased, I think for 20 years now, since I was born, being erased, because growing up I had this thing of telling my parents even that, you know what, I am a girl, I am not a boy, right? And having to go through that stage of identifying as a gay man as well. Before I stepped into my power, I didn't say come out, I said stepped into my power. Because I think we get confused. We say to someone, comes out. There's no one who comes out. People step into their power. You cannot say someone comes out, they come out of what?
They come out their vagina once.
You understand what I'm saying? So we need to be having that conversation of saying, when someone says, you know what, I didn't come out. We get this conversation a lot that, oh, when did you come out as this and that? So we need to also look at that coming out part, right? I don't want to advocate, because currently in South Africa, as democratic as it is, maybe it's democratic for the heteronormative society, but not for women like me. We need to question ourselves, what is democracy itself? Who defines democracy? And what constitutes democracy? We are able to sit in a lecture room and we're preaching democracy left, right, and center, but I don't even remember once. Yes, we are talking about post-apartheid, but trans women existed before that. And no one can say in history that exists. Right now at Rhodes University, every single residence is named after a cisgender person. They don't name it after any queer person. There is Abo Simon Nkoli. We don't name it after that. We had to sit down as a member of Nkoli Fasi, having to combine Simon Nkoli, no Brenda Fasi, as one, to say that, you know what, those people did exist, right? So we need to also question the fact that lived experiences, they actually differ in South Africa. There is the people, Abbas Biza, my head girl and head boys, the feminism, and they think their lived experiences are better than everyone else. And if you're gonna sit in a lecture room and say, I must not advocate for your lived experiences, then you better share your lived experiences. You cannot say to someone that, you know what, you're erasing my lived experiences when you don't speak about your lived experiences. So what is a lived experience? Can I say my lived experience is me being violated every single day when I'm walking down the corridor in the institution? Is that my lived experience? Is my lived experience back at home when my parents are referring to me as a guy and not as a woman? Also a lived experience? What constitutes a lived experience? So that's the conversation I think we need to put out, and for any member of the House who wants to question or actually have an input on that, needs to speak about lived experiences. Because I'm not here to sit here in the panel and hear someone to be like, oh, you are speaking from a trans perspective and you are erasing my lived experiences. We can go back and forth about lived experiences. Because I have to wear a skirt, and when I'm wearing a skirt, people violate me. You don't have to physically violate me. You staring is violation. And I don't think people do realize that. People don't want to admit the fact that, you know what, I have violated someone. So that's the conversation that we need to have, right? Right now in Rhodes University, there's SRC that's happening right now. And you'll never see someone who says, you know what, I'm trans, wants to run for that. Right now, my friend is running for a presidency and is seen as a joke because she's trans. Do you stand a chance, perhaps, of being in that position? Is there anyone in the government who can say openly that, you know what, as a trans person, I'm advocating for trans people? And please don't come at me with representation. I don't believe in representation. It's an illusion. I will not sit here and say I'm representing other people. The voice that I have, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for other people. Because once you start having this thing of representation, that, you know what, yes, in media you need trans people to be acting their roles and whatsoever. As a form of representation, you have lost it completely. So the conversation is mainly based on the fact that being erased from an institution, going forward into a workplace, that definitely I think I'm going to struggle to get a job. I'm going to struggle to get a job because they will look at my documents. Number one, when you applied at Rhodes University, you said you were male. And now you're in a job and you identify as female. Even right now, when I was checking into the hotel where we're staying at, people were staring. And that's violation. And me, people don't want to reaffirm the anger of black women. I'm not saying of trans women, but I'm saying of black women. We don't want to reaffirm their anger. So no one wants to listen and say, you know what, your anger is valid. I am deemed as someone who's violent. I'm violent because I'm quick to react to something. You misgender me, I will be quick to stand up and say you're misgendering me. And I'm seen as violent. But someone who's actually staring at me and everything, it's okay. The person is just looking at you, it's not a big deal. So I think that's the conversation we need to have. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Is it okay if I sit down? Yeah. Great. So perhaps my conversation, my contribution to the erasure, I'm very tempted to have some responses, but I must remember what I came here to say.
Yes, please.
So this was so when I heard I was coming to a university, and I haven't been in a university space and talking to people who are thinking, learning, have very interesting thoughts in a very long time. So I prepared a 2,000-word paper for you guys, which I will not read out to you, but I will just talk about what it is that I understood erasure to be, but rather to speak about, even for me, a historical erasure, about how we understand women in struggle, women in a colonial past, women struggling for freedom in colonial Africa, women post-democracy, and what do all of those things mean? So for instance, when we talk about colonialism and imperialism as a state or as a function of looting Africa for capitalist means and looting Africa for its resources, but we hardly have the conversation that rape was a weapon of colonialism, where everywhere white men went, they raped in and raped out entire nations, and that we bear the brunt of, women wear colonialism on their bodies. And there are people who, because there was a white presence in this country, has shaped their entire identity in a very different way. There are farming communities inside the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape where there are trans or biracial children because the women pay rent as sex to the farmer. And trying to contextualize that within a setting where black women and their bodies somehow get lost in the conversation of resistance and all of that. And black women, then, the resistance to colonialism and the resistance to apartheid, particular to our context, but really general to Africa, is that you'll find that women of the Chimurenga, women of Renamo, we hate Renamo, women of Frelimo, women of Swapo, women of MK, women of Poko, had a very different experience in those camps and in fighting for liberation, where during the day there were soldiers, but at night there were consumables for men in those camps, and rape even there was used as a weapon against people that they considered comrades. And so really it's to talk about the erasure of our experiences and places, and the erasure of our contribution to struggle, and the erasure of the Khoi women and the slave women of the Cape that arrived, and how we don't talk about those resistance struggles, and to try and really just bring a focus into that. But just my last thing then, in a post-democratic South Africa, how we've then also continued to raise women in very different ways. And so I was looking at some of the top African countries that have a lot of women in parliament. So I think Rwanda is leading, it's the Seychelles, it's South Africa, it's Senegal. But what does it mean to be a woman in a phallic state? So in as much as you are a functionary of the state, but the state is built on patriarchy and maleness, and what does it mean to have a woman minister if our lives as ordinary women aren't changing, because the superstructure in which that woman is placed in is patriarchal in and of itself. And so what happens is that we begin to cannibalize each other. And I really pity women who've taken up the job of being VCs in recent times, because women are going to be expectant of change that is reflective of their womanness, and the institution is phallic. And so we're going to cannibalize that woman for being not what we hope she could have been, not doing the change that we hope could be realized, but actually she's operating within an institution that hates her as a woman first. And also just general conversations about like how these African countries have like 40% of women in parliament, 58%, I think it was like 68% in Rwanda, but domestic violence is still so high. So like these women go to work and dress in suits and then still get beaten by their husbands at home and still expected to cook and clean. And so there's been a shift in having women in the workplace and having women have economic empowerment, but the home as the site of struggle is unchanged. Because now women are working more than they've ever worked before. Because not only are they still expected to be homemakers, they're now also supposed to pay half the bond. So now you're working more than ever, and you also have to lose weight within 3 months of having your baby, and you have to be a director, and all of that work that's unremunerated that women do, that goes unrecognized, that it's a part of who you are, and that oppression has become what we ought to even aspire to. Like, I feel like marriage is the best package scam. Like, you make women want to do this, but it's the most oppressive institution ever. Anyway, keep getting married, guys. So it's just like those layers of erasure for me, and how best we can try, particularly for me, like the home as the first site of struggle, where we begin to struggle with our intimate partners, with our brothers, with our fathers, in an attempt to reaffirm our own humanities in the spaces in which we call home. Yeah, so that's
I'm hoping that your mind is doing exactly what mine is. It's a lot, but it's a beautiful lot.
Okay. I think I need to go because my points are getting, firstly, I think I'll start at the point where I am a member of a blacks-only activist group. Back in 2009, 2010, I was very young back then. We called ourselves the Black Wash Movement, right? And we believe that in calling ourselves the Black Wash, we were aware that the so-called post-1994 moment, which was seen as a moment of liberation, was actually a whitewashing project, whereby, for example, we would leave Emalokshini, see our brothers and sisters going to bad schools, from bad communities to bad schools, and yet we're told that ukhululekile, you are free. But then we could not see or even understand this freedom. But all we knew is that we were sold out in 1994. So for me, when I think about erasure, I take it back at least to 1994. 1994 as a point of erasure. And we're erased, I think, structurally first and foremost, because when we are erased at the structural level, there is no stopping the other layers of erasure. Erasure in terms of gender, erasure in terms of class, and so on and so forth. So when we look at 1994, we actually sense that black people don't have land, which means the colonial conquest continues. We are still dispossessed, therefore we are erased as abantu bomhlaba. And when I talk about land, I don't talk about the materiality of land. I think that's confusing. And it misleads us. I'm talking also about land as a form of spirituality, because that's how our people understood land ownership. So when we talk about land disposition, for us that was a form of erasure. And we talk about the dispossession of our labor, because when you had land, you had the means to feed yourself, you had the means to clothe yourself. And most importantly, the erasure of our being, our personality. So the 1994 moment for us meant that black people were still landless, black people could still not work for themselves, and most importantly, black people were still dehumanized. We were things, right? And 1994 continued the thingification of black people. And today you have another species that has, I think, manifested in the township. So we call them the Nyaupe boys. Do you know about those we can't even call them human beings anymore because they do not behave in humanly ways. For example, you know that they cannot stand water on their skin. Water has them more than fire. Let's not go there. But for us, as the Blackwash movement, we saw 1994 as a solidification of the dehumanization of black people. Therefore, for me, erasure, comes from that moment. And at the center of erasure, we have the nation state. I don't know what it means for us to, for example, I think Africans, I love Africans, but we have this perennial inability to learn from our past. Nowhere in Africa has the state project delivered liberation. It gives us partial freedoms, it lets us in while excluding us at the same time. That is why today we are sitting here trying to find out how we represent people like my sister here, how we accommodate people who come from different lived experiences, because the state firstly was not created with us in mind, remember? It was imposed on us, right? And all of that was a form of erasure. My work focuses a lot on liberation movements, and I tend to question why the liberation movement did not change its framework when it seeks to liberate us. When you look at the liberation movement, it responds to the colonizer in the very same way that the colonizer oppressed black people. For example, we all know Western culture is patriarchal. They don't have a history whereby women are centric, right? But we have that different conversation. Now, when you are responding to a violence that is male-led, as an African, if you are responding to a violence that is man-led, it means that you are erasing yourself, because now you are taking your Nzingas, you are taking your Ya Asantewas out of the context. You are becoming the leaders, because I suppose they understood that the colonizer could only see the man or the male as a formidable enemy. It could not recognize the woman because they don't have that in our culture, but we did. Now, where I fault the liberation movement is them taking the form and shape of a Western, in fact, they designed the tool of liberation along the colonial framework, and therefore they erase women and they kill spirituality in the movement. If you look back into the first resistance wars and you look at how the kings and the queens fought, Amakosi, for example, you will not go to war without what we call in isiXhosa itolo. Itolo is a spiritual medium. They tell you where the enemy is. They tell you how you even kill your enemy, because in war you are not supposed to kill a human being brutally. They're supposed at least to offer some form of dignified death. We had those systems in our indigenous ways of resisting. But when the movement comes into play, obviously with the influence of missionary education and missionaries' Christianity, these men become Western. In fact, with the birth of Western education, we lose a lot of ourselves. Now, when you come back to 1994 and you ask yourself, what has South Africa gotten by way of independence or liberation, you actually see that we have just been given a white way of freedom. We have been taught about how to define our freedom. Our freedom does not come from our indigenous ways of how to be. It comes from a very colonial context. And therefore, when I think about, my sister made a very interesting example. In those camps, in the liberation camps, it was actually not only women who were being raped. There are several Boko boys who were being raped by these generals. The hierarchy of the army, which is a colonial concept, created a space whereby ababatata badala bangena abantwana babancinci. I'm working with many Boko comrades who are even afraid to come out because they are consumed by the patriarchal understanding of what being a man is. Therefore, to have been raped means you have been dehumanized. As if, by the way, ubufazi is a lower sense of being. If we look into our languages, for example, when you get married in Sesotho, bari utsaya mulikani, right? You are taking your equal. This is documented, but we don't read our history. In fact, our history is not even in the textbooks that we teach, those of us who are in the academy. So the problem for me is at the structural level, whereby firstly, you have a state that continues to erase our people's memories of who they are, our people's memories of what they are supposed to be. And secondly, underneath the state, you have institutions that force people into binaries. The conversation that we're having with my sister, and I'm closing, in fact, I asked, why is she transitioning into the colonial presentation of a woman? You know, and she said, no, it's actually quite difficult. And today she has a particular outfit so that she can almost scream out, I am transitioning, which is rather very unfortunate. But I shared a story, my experience. I grew up as something that was called a tomboy, a kasi, right? All my friends were boys. I only became conscious of my gender when I started wearing a bra. And one of my pinches, one of my friends did that thing that we hate so much, ladies. That for me was a moment of, oh, you know. And secondly, while I think okay, I know my dad has other kids in Japan. You know how it is in the black family. I am my father's first child. And I believe my dad wanted to have a boy. So he raised me as a boy child. I used to have rollerblades, I had a bicycle, like nkula ngumjita. But as soon as my body started, you know, taking form, my same friends, the same friends I had who would come to wash my father's car were now pushed away by my father, mind you. The same boys that we grew up playing with were now being pushed away because suddenly I'm becoming something else. So I think for us in blackness, gender is very queer. If you look into our languages, there is never like a simple concept, ma, lume. Why does it start with ma? Yeah. You must ask yourself that. Because uma is mama. Yeah. And, you know, makazi. Umakazi being the center. In Sotho they have a rakhadi, a concept ka rakhadi. Nothing can happen in the family takoi rituals without a rakhadi. That tells you that the status of women in the indigenous African context was not what it is today. But we are a conquered people, we are a captured people, so things have been turned upside down. Because
yeah, I think that's actually a mouthful. They have actually captured everything. But for my side, this is the input. I think you have captured a number of things that I wanted to actually share. But importantly, to actually share that I'm a girl who comes from the dusty street of Soweto. That is in Joburg.
Yeah. Hey.
And I'm a girl who daily was and still is exposed to women who have scars. Women who have been raped. Women, when they had to go and apply for their kids, they are reminded that that kid does not have a father. They are reminded that they are not married because that's what society expects of a woman who has a child. But I also have to say, as a woman, I was made conscious about my identity. I experienced all the isms, whether you call it racism, whether you call it sexism, whether you call it classism, you name it, ageism and so forth. I experienced that. When I stepped into a university, I was reminded that I am black. I was reminded that the course that I was doing, black people are not supposed to be in that class. I remember at one point when my lecturer said to me, for once I understand why they call you brightness. That to me, it's about invisibility. That to me, it's about silencing. Being a black woman, daily we are silenced. Not because we don't have the capacity to think. In fact, when we think and when we start to speak, and people start saying, you are actually a different black person. You go to gatherings. I mean, I was in Portugal in April, and this old man who is a professor, as I walked through the conference, I realized this is one of the respected people in this particular conference. And this man had an audacity after my presentation to actually say, you know what, I've worked with women from Africa. They are not like you. You are a different black person. But with that said, if I may remind you, there is always an audience.
Yeah.
There are witnesses. There are observers. The question that I want to pose, how do we as women contribute into this? Because when we are observing, we are actually enabling this invisibility. We are enabling the erasure. But let's go to the concept. For me, oppression is about silencing people. There are different levels of silencing people. For me, silencing can be self-silencing. You self-silence because you have realized if you speak, it's not going to make any difference. You self-silence because you are scared. I think there was a word that came out from the panel. We talk about safe spaces, but one may ask, how safe are those spaces? And then it moves me to another point that I want to link with the silence. Another agenda that I have, it's about intra-group dynamics. We talk about women, and we appreciate that as women there is an intersectionality. I mean, I'm not just a woman, I'm a black woman. And I'm not just a black woman, I'm a single parent. And I'm not just a single parent, I'm an educated single parent. And that on its own brings its own dynamics. So sometimes when we talk about oppression, we look outside instead of looking within us. How, as women, are we enabling this erasure? I was fortunate enough when Nelson Mandela was released. Coming from Soweto, Mufula South, I was able to march to Orlando Stadium. The ambience, the feeling. In fact, I remember, I don't know how we got to Orlando Stadium because I was studying at the Morris Isaacson. The march was so easy because everyone was there until the time we had to go back home because the crowd is no longer there. But the sentiments that I'm bringing about Nelson Mandela celebrating the centenary, he was our hope. We had this message of hope to say things will be different. Are we at the point where we say the more things change, the more they stay the same? Are we at the point where we actually say there are other narratives? Now other people are actually saying, you know what? We might not be where we used to be. We are better off than where we used to be. But some of us say, in the lendlela. It's a long walk to freedom. There are spaces. If maybe I can also talk about this silencing, self-silencing, about us women, how we talk about each other. And I want to quote one woman. It was in April that we said goodbye to Umama Winnie Madikizela Mandela. I look at that woman, I say to me, she's a powerhouse. When I was growing up, I was excited about people like Winnie Madikizela Mandela. I was excited about Mampele Rampele. I was excited, in fact, about Patricia de Lille, because she stood up for what was right. I don't know the transition to the other era. I'm not going to go there. But the point Madikizela says, may her soul rest in peace. I mean, there's a lot of erasure that happened about Winnie Madikizela Mandela. There are so many messages. In fact, when we talk about erasure, we talk about identities. It reminds me about getting into certain institutions. In fact, when you enter the gate of an institution, you forget your identity. Because why? You want to fit in. You have to behave so white that the white people like you. Because you want to be part of the clique. Because you want to be accepted. But fortunately or unfortunately, you are always unconsciously, not consciously, unconsciously reminded that, Hade, you are black. But let me go to what Madikizela Mandela said. The overwhelming majority of women accept patriarchy unquestionably and even protect it. Working out the resultant frustration not against men, but against themselves. In their competition for men as sons. But it's not only about competition for men as sons, competition for men as our partners, competition with men as our husbands. Very interesting that when we fight each other. We don't fight the person who's actually making us to fight. Traditionally, the violated wife bides her time and offloads her built-in aggression on her daughter-in-law. So men dominate women through the agency of women themselves. So with that said, I think I need to just pause there. Thank you. Samantha.
Guys, I know that we're wanting to ask some questions, but can you please keep it down? Like, we need to hear, and we need to give respect to the person on the mic. One last offering. After Sam, I'm going to open up to the floor for questions to our panelists. I'm hoping you have noted them.
Okay, cool. So, I think in preparing for this dialogue or this engagement, to be quite honest, I almost bailed on my way. I'm not sure it was the last person who called me this afternoon. Gwebani. Yeah, I almost say, Chief, it's not happening. And yeah, the reason for that is, I mean, and naturally, I tend to pause colleagues. Can I call you colleagues, sisters, brothers, whatever? I tend to pause because I am a person who introspects very deeply on a daily basis. I'm one of those people who problematizes myself in as much as I like to problematize people I have a problem with. And I think that was something I struggled with as I came here earlier on, because I said to myself, and we have those moments as women in particular, and I'm not going to speak from another perspective that I don't live on a daily basis. But we as women, I mean, just looking at that poster, having to think about it, I was exhausted. And I think as women, we are tired. We're really tired. We're really tired, and it's part of our daily lived experience to be tired, to wake up tired. And I say that as a young white girl, I can't even imagine what it's like to add blackness, to add everything else. So if I'm tired, other people must be exhausted. But just coming here, that is honestly how I felt. And particularly from the space that I'm from, I am from multiple spaces, but I wanted to open up the discussion around politics and governance. And when I talk politics, colleagues, I'm not talking about partisan politics. So someone raised Patricia Dillo. If you want to shoot and ask the question, booze, it's fine. But that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about politics. I'm talking about the everyday kind of interactions. And politics is everywhere, by the way, because politics is about power and the positionality of men to power. Now, there's often a dialogue as to between white men and black men who has more power. Or if white men have power, does that mean now that black men have no power? There's often that dialogue and engagement with particular reference to white women. Because if we were to have some kind of pyramid or hierarchy, we'd say white guys, I'm using a term there, guys. White men, boys club,
Yeah.
elitist. Then we debate, is it white women or black men? But we know that black females are at the bottom, right? But there's constantly that engagement between those other three groups. And that was the first thing I wanted to start off with and say, for me, erasure is about othering. You other someone else. And you other them based on your preconceived ideas and notions of that particular group. That's the reality of the situation. So, this word feminism is often problematized by many people, and there are so many definitions and ideas around what is feminism that we could probably sit here until tomorrow, if not the rest of the week, discussing that. But for me, when I think of that and when I think of women, what essentially it comes down to is your premise. So whatever your premise is for feminism, that's actually what matters. So in my view, your premise should be that women matter, but they don't just matter, they matter equally. So with respect, it's not about white men or black men saying, Womandla, we support you. Ne? Thanks, we appreciate the support. It's like us white people when we go into black spaces that do allow us. I know there is a panelist that's been black only spaces, but there are spaces where there is that intersect. It's like us going and saying, sure guys, because, and it's something I've had to live with and problematize even with myself as an ally, right? And that's something we need to delve into as well, the role of allying. So when you're a man and you come into the space, I'll never forget NMU. When we had a reference list situation similar to Rhodes around rape culture, we had some young men who wanted to lead the protest. And then I thought to myself, hey, this is a challenge. Because now you're actually not allying and helping, now you're actually reinforcing the problem, right? So for me, it's about proximity to power. That's what it's about. And the space, who dominates the space. So I wanted to say, in the context of politics in government, we have a challenge where there's this overemphasis on access, and someone mentioned it brilliantly earlier on when they spoke about representation. So everything's about how many women are in the space. Becomes like a numbers game, right? So I'll give you an example. I'll be blunt and open about it. The speaker can challenge me tomorrow, it's fine. I'll probably get a 500 Rand fine, it's all good. In our Nelson Mandela Bay Municipal Council, let's bring it home, let's bring it right here. We have 120 councillors from all political parties, right? We only have 36 women councillors out of 120. So we're not even at that 50-50 phase, right? And that's across all political parties that make up that 120 councillors. But now the challenge I have is that when people come to council, the first thing they want to talk about is, we don't have enough women councillors. Valid, truth, it's there, it's the reality. But why aren't we extending the discussion to the institutional culture those 36 are subject to every single day in the council? Because can I be honest with you, as one of those 36 councillors, right now I wouldn't advise any young woman in particular to apply to become a councillor. Does that make me not a feminist? Does that make me less of an advocate? Does that make me less of an activist? Well, we can debate it. But the point I'm making is that even when we change the demographics through representation, the institutional culture doesn't change. So those 36 women councillors come into council, and one, they don't have executive positions. So we are what you call in politics voting cattle. You know, you come as speaker, yeah, I support, I don't support. Instead of having a woman in the mayoral committee who gets to lead a whole directorate and enforce institutional culture to be changed. Do you get what I mean? So it's about power again. That's what it comes down to, proximity to power. And yes, I am of course coming from the perspective in terms of a colonial point of view, because the reality is we inherited that kind of governance system, right? It is patriarchal in nature. But that's what I think that the conversation should be extended to, is the institutional culture. What are we exposed to every day as women? Not just how many are there of us in the space. I also want to talk about two last things. One, we have a challenge where women of age, and now some people might problematize me and say, but it's disrespectful, you know, to speak against your elders and all of this. Fine, granted, it's taken. But I think context matters, right? So in a professional space, when mama say little girl, because by the way, I'm not your little girl in council, I'm your colleague. Yeah. Right? And yes, there are things that I can learn from you without a doubt, because you've lived longer than I have. But there is also space for me as a young, dynamic female to make valuable contributions in that particular space. And that's the problem as well when we are set up to fail. Because we are set up to fail. That's the reality of the situation. I think I've triggered someone. Second, lastly, I want to say that we need to deal with gender constructs, and I think the only way you deal with it really is by raising children differently than what we have been doing. So stop raising girl children in one way and boy children in another way. Or stop, thank you to the trans panelists for sharing that, to say, stop conforming them in the first instance, if that's the case, if that's what we are guilty of, which we are. Because we're going to reinforce all of these gender constructs, stereotypes, expectations, double standards that are just exhausting if we continue to go like that. But I just want to read one thing from someone I'm really inspired with, or inspired by, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie from Nigeria. And just on the point of Umamwini, it's so sad when we talk about erasure, it's so sad how there's all this hype and celebration only once she's passed away. It says a lot about how the history and role and placement, positionality, influence, power of women really is in South Africa. But I want to read this quickly to you.
I hope I can't listen.
No, it's not long. It's just one last aspect about what I mentioned in my introduction. How we like to have, you know what you call keyboard warriors. Yeah, yes, it's social media sometimes. Social media feminists, ne? What we call, or what Chimamanda calls, feminism light, right? So she says, beware the danger of what I call feminism light. It is the idea of conditional female equality. Please reject this entirely. It is a hollow, appeasing, and bankrupt idea. Being a feminist is like being pregnant. You either are or you are not. You either believe in the full equality of men and women or you don't. Then lastly, she goes on to say, and this is going to hit, it's going to trigger, I know. Do you remember how, and she's reflecting on one of her lived experiences. Do you remember how we laughed and laughed and at an atrociously written, she can say that she's an author, written piece about me some years ago? The writer had accused me of being angry, as though being angry was something to be ashamed of. Of course I'm angry. I'm angry about racism. So first she comes with that outlook to say, I am a black female, right? But starts with black and associates it with racism, her lived experience though. So I'm angry about racism. I am angry about sexism. But I recently came to the realization that I'm angrier about sexism than I am about racism. Because in my anger about sexism, I often feel lonely. Because I love and live among many people, white and black, who easily acknowledge racial injustice, but not gender injustice. I cannot tell you, almost done, how often people I care about, both men and women, have expected me to make a case for sexism, to prove it, as it were, while never having to do the same for a case of racism. So I wanted to end off with that and say, it's really important that we try and not police people in their activism. Last week we saw an instance between Sisi Ntiki Mazwai and Sisi Mbata. Nomzamo, I do know her from television and many sets we've shared on SABC, and she's gone on to do more great things. Try and not police who or what an activist is based on our own preconceived expectations and ideas. I'll leave it at that.
So I'm glad I'm not you guys, because I'm here to facilitate. Thank you. I'm here to facilitate and not ask the questions myself. So if I can have 5 hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Those 5, nobody will go first. 6. I'll be nice. Because we're running out of time. And it's a lot, né? It's a lot. And I know that you're not going to walk away with all your questions answered, which is brilliant, because then it allows you to go and research and find out some more. But please be clear in your question. Please introduce yourself. And if you have somebody in the panel who would like to really, if you direct your question to something particular, please mention. Thanks.
My name is Radebe. My first question is directed to Asonele. Sorry for mispronouncing that. Sam just mentioned Uchimamanda Adichie, and that quote, in as much as yes, it's a powerful quote, I wanted to know how that erases your experience as a trans woman if the same person who's being quoted said, women are women and trans women are trans women. And then my second question will be to Zandi. Please, can you allow me? My second question is to Zandi. A lot of the panel has agreed, almost an intellectual chorus, that being a woman is, as Lomtamenya would say, an extreme sport. But you were one of the only people who gave us maybe the positives of what it means to carry a vagina almost. And I'm hoping you can elaborate how democracy itself has worked to underdevelop women and the status of the feminine.
I'm going to allow, do you want to offer? Or you can take other questions. Other questions. Second, yes.
Okay, my audible.
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, my name is Mana. I'm a student. It works. I'm a student at the institution. Now I have just one question. from all the presentations that have been made and all the, everything that's been said, there seems, as we call it, an intellectual chorus of being a woman is difficult, and as Renato likes to call it, an extreme sport. Now, my thing is, you seem to posture being a woman as some sort of performance, and I'm trying to understand if being a woman is a performance or a series of coping mechanisms, and there is no definite identity that we can obtain or we have. Is that what you're saying or trying to tell us? Because what you're doing by telling us what we were before, I'm not validating the validity of the fact that history predetermines who and what we become, but this insistence on retelling what we were before seems to be some sort of clutch we hold on to not define who we can be or are at the moment. If we can just get some sort of clarity with regards to that, what definitively can we say is being a woman?
I guess my question in part links to No's about Chimamanda Adichie. And I know that various conjugants find her extremely problematic because she positions feminism within born women. She positioned it right there. In the quotation that Sam shared, she does talk about pregnancy. A trans woman can't fall pregnant. So therefore that disqualifies her then as a woman in Chimamanda's eyes, or according to her theory. So I guess my question then is pointed to representation. I know Chimamanda is informed by her biases, being a woman from Nigeria, middle class woman from Nigeria. She has a certain life experience that informs the way she would address an issue. So now in terms of representation, you said that representation is not it's not something that should be imposed. If you are at the front of a certain discussion, then you should not be held accountable for certain groups that you led out. You are just solely speaking for yourself. So now I'm finding it hard to now problematize Chimamanda when a statement like that was raised. So I guess my question is, if you reach a certain notoriety, should it fall upon you to recognize all the others and give voice? And this is particularly because you have a mic and you are being heard, and the other does not necessarily have a mic and can be heard. So I guess that's my question. Thank you very much.
Sorry, are you directing a question to Asonele?
Yes.
Anyone can take it. Okay. There was a hand at the back. Yes. Yeah.
I think I'm audible too. My name is Noxie, and I think I just want to ask if do we want a fixed definition of what a woman is, because we constantly agree that woman is many things, and I think this even relates to the wording of the X or the A, and we need to at some point also appreciate that women, or society in general, is organized in different groups. So the word woman or being a woman can be different things. So do we really want a fixed definition? Second to that, I think one of the things that erase women is the issue of language. And even the word, I always say the word woman is problematic, because in my Xhosa language, it's in different groupings and it means different things and it's different levels. A woman, uma. A woman, intombi. A woman, usisi. So are we really sure that we want that type of thing? I think in relations to Sam, I think also to the first speaker about the issue of representation and speaking out, I think we must appreciate that we speak out differently. Yeah. And this also relates to social media. And I say this all the time, look, we're not getting education in classrooms anymore. And in spaces where we can't speak, there are spaces that we choose to speak, we choose to type. And I don't think we should put those boundaries there with titles of feminism light and feminism. Even that example by Chimamanda of a pregnant woman, I mean, you are either pregnant or you're either not. Or you can be pregnant for 9 months and not have a baby, have a stillborn. That means that I can be a feminist in her context. I can be a feminist in whatever fixed definition of feminism there is, and I can fall out of it, you know? I can stop. And I think once we're able to I really don't want us to find a fixed definition of woman or of what a woman is. Don't want us to find a fixed definition of what feminism is, you know? And let's just find what relates to us. But then I think within the women agenda, when we are able to define what that is, in our different spaces, different groupings, and different whatever, there should be a common cause. And lastly, I think I think we must just understand something in terms of grouping and the women and the race and the class. And I always make this, it's very simple. You have a white man, you have a white woman, you have a black man, you have a black woman. The white, when we speak, we say race, the white man and a white woman take a step further. When we say class, the white man takes a step further, the white woman takes a step further. When we say gender, the white man takes a step forward and the black man takes a step forward. So even in that structure, you have the white man on top, you have the white woman following, you have the black man following, but you have that black woman at the very back. And I don't think we should, you know, forget that. That's how currently it's structured. And that becomes very important. It puts a lot of things into context. Thank you.
Two more.
Thank you. Igama lam nje awonke wakwaVabaza. My thinking is triggered by the point that was made by the panel, the part about umfazi. And then I got triggered to an extent that usually we tend to dehumanize a person by using that word. If, take for instance, you're fighting with a guy, a papa, and you say, "Avumfazi," as if you are like you're putting a figure that anybody who has tendencies of papa or gossiping is a woman. Now, fortunately and unfortunately for some of the people around here, I'm a Christian, and now I love quoting the Bible, but unfortunately at this point in time, I forgot the exact scripture. There's a part in the Bible in the Judges. Now listen to this. There's a part in the Bible, the Judges, that is about Gwebani, that triggered me also to see that the thing about gender-based violence is something that has always been there. In this scripture, there was a man and a woman who ended up sleeping over to this place because it was dark. Now when they sleep over to this place, the other man came to the room and knocked into the door. When they were knocking, they said to the owner of the house, "Please open up the door. We want the women that are inside the door." Now, when you're analyzing the statement that was made by the man who were knocking at the door, they saw that there's only one woman who got in. However, they are sentient the same women. Now, when somebody else describes that line, according to Judi's, a term woman is referred to somebody who is a lower class. Now, when somebody says to you, you're a woman, when you are a male, it then means that they are undermining you. You are nothing. So I really am triggered by how we always use, specifically whether it's us as females, or we our fellow sisters, by the way. Then my last point is on, again, it's triggered something that I usually call someone, like there's a term that I have in my mind, which is called a patriarchal princess. Now, somebody once asked me, what do I mean when I say patriarchal princess? Now, somebody there, it's a pity I'm not good with people's names. However, I'm very perfect in keeping faces. I have a good photogenic memory.
Come on, wait.
Now, I remember that one of the panelists did mention how we as women occupy the spaces of men.
Now you find out that, yes, I am this vice chancellor of a particular institution. However, I am not completing my vision. There's a male behind me who I'm completing their vision. Now, that's what I call a patriarchal princess. Now, that's when it's talking
last question before we go back to others.
Good evening, everyone. I'll try and keep this very brief because people will talk almost all the time. My question is, we as females, we as women, we are not well. And our well-being is affected by the multiple oppressions that we face on a day-to-day basis. You know? And that affects how inadequate we get, you know, whether it be in employment, whether it be in academics. So I'm trying to ask, how do we navigate through the non-wellness into being constructive citizens, into being citizens that in an academic space produce students that can be activists after that space, when you are not well yourself and you are standing at a point where you are the leader and you are trusted to be the transformer of the information. So, and you are expected to be in an office where there's males and they're expecting you to be fully operational when your operations that day are not the same. So how do we navigate through that system?
Thank you very much. Zandi, I'm going to put the spotlight on you first.
That's fine. I'll just be very brief. About being constructive citizens in the academy, I want to say it is impossible. You cannot be constructive in a deconstructive space, because as we are seated here, there are those pictures of imposing patriarchs that are just staring at us, and no one UNISA has the same setup, or rather I should say used to have the same setup. Pictures that side, pictures that side. I took them down, and my fellow academics, so-called black academics, didn't like that. They felt, you know, at least I should have spelled Bani Pityana. But Bani Pityana remains a problematic man because he did not disrupt coloniality at UNISA, he perpetuated it. The question about women and democracy, I think for me, my critique is in democracy itself. Democracy is not a disruption. Democracy is a continuation of coloniality. Because as I said, the liberation movement, which took power in 1994, had coloniality in its basis. Therefore, it cannot liberate us. It can only give us partial liberation. Hence the problems that we are facing today. And problems to me are not problems of changing culture. You must change the institution itself. You must tear it down. Fanon says, you know, decolonization is not a matter of talking nicely to your colonizer. You must destroy it completely. Some people are afraid to go there, but we are going to be dragged, you know, kicking and screaming to that point, because that's the point of our rehumanization. Black women, and I think the question of at the risk of playing Olympics of oppression, I think it is not entirely true to say women are at the bottom, you know, because there is the black child that is abused by abafazi themselves. Black women in their majority are abusers of, you know, little children. And you would be incorrect to blame the black woman for that, because it means you have not understood how violence operates in blackness, right? If, for example, you say that black men are trash, and you leave it at that, and you don't look at the experience of the black child in the hands of umama, then I think your analysis is a bit disingenuous. The way that violence operates in a black space is such that no one is spared. You have little children that perpetuate the same violence that they see kumama no tata on other children, because blackness as itself is a space of violence. Violence is normalized in our communities, and I don't understand why when they kill transgendered people we scream as if we have not been killed since day one. We operate and relate to each other as violence, and that is a product, I think, of colonialization. And lastly, I think it is important, Ma-Africa, as we think about relearning and unlearning, it is important to think from our own indigenous spaces. This is where the question of history comes from. Our concepts, how we imagine freedom, how we even understand oppression, it comes from a colonial lens. Therefore, if we don't use at least what is remaining, which is our languages, then I don't think we will see liberation anytime soon. If we don't understand the value of conceptualizing freedom, oppression in our own languages, then we are too far from liberation. isiXhosa, for example, gives us the concept of umlingani, right? Umyeni. If you go to the English language, go to your dictionary, husband or husbandry is translated or associated to land, right? Someone who has land. So already that tells you that indoda or a husband is someone that must have land. And right there you must ask yourself who must not have land. Therefore it's the wife. We don't have that in our languages. We have umyeni, umlingani. Therefore we need to, history is very, very important. And it determines not only where we have been, but how we are going to be what we need to be. I think for me, we cannot compromise on history.
Okay, I'll be replying to the Chimamanda Ngozi.
Shame, this must happen a lot.
Happens a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I'll be replying to the woman are woman, trans woman are woman, and also the representation, different lived experiences, problematizing others and who has the mic, right? Firstly, as much as Usisi next to me said, blackness is queer, womanhood is not monolith. It's not static, right? So it's not a one-way street. So when Chimamanda was saying, women are women based on pregnancy, based on having breasts and whatsoever, what Chimamanda was basically saying is that womanhood is monolith. And then we need to boil down and ask ourselves this question, that who actually defines what a woman is? Is Chimamanda the same person who's going to advocate, and I'm going to be tying it with the whole voice thing, right? That is Chimamanda the same person who's going to be advocating for cisgender women and saying that, you know what, womanhood is like this and this and this and this, and at the same time problematize other black cisgender women and say they are going against feminism? So that voice itself is also a problem, right? So we need to look at the fact that when we're talking about representation, when I said is an illusion, what I meant is that, like what Sam was saying, that it doesn't deconstruct the structure that exists. Right now, I can say, you know what, Levin Cox is representing me. We pose trans women are speaking about the violence that they face daily. Does that actually give me access to proper healthcare here in South Africa? Does it give me respect from other fellow members within institutions to say that? So when we talk about representation, when I say it's an illusion, it doesn't change anything. Yes, it's a voice, but what does that voice do? Does that voice actually give someone else an opportunity to say that, you know what, there's a way forward coming from that, right? So when it comes to holding someone accountable or liable of actually speaking against societal norms or whatever you want to call it, we need to look at the fact that, you know what, as an individual, you as yourself, I'm speaking here, I'm sitting here, I'm not advocating for other trans women. I can't do that. I might have a voice right now because why? Because I was privileged enough to go to an institution. There's a trans girl who's sitting at home. They don't know yet they're trans because they've never been exposed to this institution. So I cannot say that, you know what, I'm going to be representing trans people when there are people that are still battling with their identities till today. So the whole representation being an illusion type of thing comes from that. It stems from that. So Chimamanda defining womanhood as monolith, being aesthetic thing, that you know what, you either have to have breasts, you have to have a vagina, you have to have this and this and this and this, itself is a problem. And I've been problematizing trans women as well. Because yesterday, with the march and whatsoever, the person was in front as a trans woman and had breasts, let me just put it like that, had breasts, and I asked her a question. I'm like, what's the reason you're doing that? And it's because I want a safe space. And I asked her the same question. I'm like, what constitutes a safe space? So are those breasts going to say, you know what, no one is going to kill you? Are those breasts saying that, you know what, no one is going to say, but we in daughter still? So we need to be questioning ourselves based on that. So representation itself, it's an illusion. And I'm not going to turn back on my word when I say it's an illusion, because it's not changing anything. Right now when I have to go to a healthcare center and everything, my documents, they say what? They say male. When I have to go fetch my HRT, still identify with my dead names, right? So itself, it's not pushing anything or pushing the mandate forward. So thank you.
Thank you. So maybe then, because I spoke about VCs, I suppose the patriarchal princess's question, I should be answering that, I think. I am bereaved as I'm here today about the death of Professor Mayosi. And it's ravaged me as a person. Grappling with the idea of black excellence, grappling with institutions that are built to turn us against one another, in that we assume that when a black person is in power, that they can effect change, which isn't always the case, which is never the case, really. You can't effect change at UCT. And I sat, and I mean, like, I was a student at Rhodes, and Asonele might have very different experience to Dr. Mabizela than I have. And I sat in a meeting with Dr. Mabizela, and I pitied him. I really did. Because I knew him as a person before he was VC, when he was DVC. And I knew the words coming out of his mouth weren't his words as he was speaking. And I mean, the conversation that we were having as the convocants was around the name change of the university. And then I said to him, like, if you think that Rhodes then is a brand, how about we start renaming the reses, which I hear now has been done. And Dr. Mabizela was like, I mean, is that really necessary? You know, I'm just like, you have a res named Jan Smuts. Dr. Mabizela, you have a res named Bite. You have a res named Jamison. Like, these things are despicable. And out of that context, I understood that it's difficult being a first black in a space and trying to be, and fighting white people internally in these spaces, but going out to black people and being called a coconut and so on and so forth. And being rejected by students who don't know that the system is fighting you inside. And so what happens is that we cannibalize one another. And also here, I feel like black academics and administration staff aren't honest enough about the exclusion they face internally, in that they don't want to sell out that institution, even like their jobs. Guys, jobs are important. And so I remember when, I think at my last graduation, or before my second last graduation at Rhodes, Dr. Salim Badat returned to the university and dragged the council. And he talked about every single thing that he wanted to do at that university that council said no to. And he was the first black VC of that university. He had to take half of his own salary to build a school that would allow kids from Grahamstown, Gadra, to improve their marks in order for them to come to Rhodes. The university would not fund that project. He had to take his own money to do that. And we learned of that after years of umtuka. Like, I mean, I was at his office every day saying, so what are you doing here? Why are you not fighting for our rights? Why don't we have a bus? So I think, like, when you place women as patriarchal princesses in a world like that is phallocentric, that is centered around a penis and a man and white men, is that we're not giving each other a break. And I think in order for us to be able to do that, we have to have the important conversations. You must say, but Musa, hey, it's tough here, hey? You don't know what these people are doing to me. And then you must say, but like, how do we then how do we then find a way for us to work within the spaces that we have in order for us to understand transformation? My heart bled for Dr. Mayos. And it continues to bleed. Because here is the epitome of black excellence and everything, and I'm from Umtata, and I know the Mayosis, and I know his sister, and I know that he was a great, great man. But he crumbled under the pressure of being unable to deliver to black students whom he loved and cared for, but because the system was as such, and that he tried to resign twice and they wouldn't let him. And so, before we say patriarchal princesses and coconuts and women aren't doing this, also around the patriarchal princesses, I think it's very important to not center women at the heart of patriarchy. I think we must always view women not as vectors of patriarchy, and even if they execute roles which are patriarchal, to understand that within a context of violence. And like Usiswam said in the beginning, that blackness is relating to each other through violence. And if there's a stratification, and if I, as a respectable woman who comes from a nuclear family, whose father is a pastor with several degrees, can get respectability in other places, and so I use that in order to oppress other people whom I view lower, like what Chimamanda does, who I view lower on the social strata, to understand that as an act of violence. That it's the violence in which I grew up in that I understand, that I continue to perpetuate, and that there's room for unlearning. But also I've realized that people who refuse to learn. So.
Right, Ms. Sam, do you have anything to offer?
I think from my side, I want to touch on Noxie's point, and also from the patriarchy princess coming from institutions of higher learning. I think I also had a point on silence. Language can actually be used to silence people. Language can also be used to exclude and include certain people. Language, I mean, if we talk about dialects, a number of linguistics and so forth, but importantly also, by virtue of speaking English, Afrikaans and so forth, some of us are not even comfortable of sharing our experiences because of the language we are using. Institution of higher learning, if I can abuse this space. Research, workplace bullying. I focus on 3 institutions, previously white, previously black, and also the English institution. What is very interesting in institution of higher learning, looking at bullying, students are bullied. Most of the black staff members are in institution of higher learning because they believe they can make a difference. Because they believe they don't want the black student to experience what they experienced when they were students. But what I've also picked up, it's how black students also have an audacity to oppress black academics. Because we believe that knowledge is white. So if it's not a white person, then it cannot be knowledge. But it also goes back to the intra-group realities. Black are fighting against blacks. But there is also white against white. There is also women against women. But what is the reason of that happening? I also said, I mean, if we were to dissect, look into the socio-ecological model, look from the micro level to the macro to the micro level, you'll start to appreciate that there are observers. You'll start to appreciate that there are things happening in the system. We have a black VC. There are expectations. And as women, when we say it's a black VC, then we expect a black VC to do magic, if not miracles. We fail to appreciate also that there's a system. And a system that is designed that is actually populated with white males in strategic positions. If it's not at senior level, I always talk about the politics of the stomach. Politics of the stomach, not what we eat, but the politics of the stomach in institution of higher learning. If those people at the middle level management. That HOD, that director, that makes their life impossible. That HOD and director who's able to actually convey that all is well, whereas all is not well. And those are the oppression that students daily experience and staff daily experience. But we don't talk about that. The same goes to the policies that institutions have. They say when you start talking about racism and say, I'm experiencing racism, they say brightness, but we have a policy on racism. The same policy that actually tells you that if you say someone is a racist and we find them not guilty, we are opening a case against you. So the whole process is silencing. And then we have these committees, and then with these committees we say we have black academics being represented. But the black academics being represented, the committees actually say when we make the vote is based on majority. Who wins? So the black people become tokens. The black people become frustrated in the process. So there's a lot that we need to unpack. The culture of the institution, we haven't even gone that far. The conversation that happened in the classroom when you feel like you submit an assignment and somebody tells you that, no, what you have submitted is not it. I mean, the conversation about decolonization. We've been focusing on the content. We've been talking about the student. And I'm wondering, when we decolonize, are we going to move to a space of talking about decolonizing content in such a way that we also reflect on gender? Are we going to decolonize in such a way that we also reflect who is teaching? Yes. Because we talk about all these things, but we are not looking about who is going to deliver this lesson. I think I'll just hold it there.
We're about to land. 5 more minutes.
Sure. Just quickly, I'm just smiling, Ma'am Brightness, because the reality is that when a female has that pitch of voice, they are regarded as emotional or weak. So as you, when in fact it's actually just pure intellectualism and passion. But as you kept going, I was thinking, hey, if you were in one of my meetings, one of my counselors will go, oh, this one is emotional, you know? So that's the reality of the situation, but that was just a quick side note. I think there was a really interesting question that no one really tackled around reimagining where we could be instead of solely focusing on where we've come from. And that's really important, but I think the challenge with that is that I think sometimes we have to understand that separating the individual, the human being, from the system. So I don't think, or the structure, so I don't think it's necessarily a matter of, as women, we don't see ourselves, or we don't have the ability to reimagine ourselves differently, or what we could achieve differently. I think it's more of, we acknowledge that the structure doesn't allow us to do that or be that. And that's the first point of departure. But I do believe there was a really great point made around, we can't solely focus on where we come from, but we do need to move forward and look forward, although that can be problematized itself. That statement of look forward, the past is the past. Because we hear that racially, we hear that from people who look like me around race. That's why I wouldn't want to, that's why I welcomed that comment coming from a female. Had it come from a man, I would have had a serious problem with it. And I also wanted to say, just on Chimamanda, I think it's great if people problematize her, but if you're a heterosexual man, I find that very ironic. Equally, get what I mean? I think it's, and I think that's really important, that if you're a heterosexual male, what is your intention about problematizing Chimamanda's thoughts? Because is that for you to problematize in the first place? Because if you measure your proximity, and I'm not talking about anyone here, I'm saying in general, and using that as an example, when we have males who come and problematize the work and intellectualism of females, it's problematic. Because what is your intention behind it? And your intention is deliberate. And I wanted to talk quickly about that intent. Intent is very deliberate. So when we talk about social media can be used to humanize or it can be used to dehumanize. So what is your intention when you advocate for women? What is your intention when you advocate for trans folk? What is your intention behind advocating for gender non-conforming folk? I think we constantly have to measure our intent, because intent is deliberate, it's calculated. It's the same way that strategically the history of women in this country is never taught. When you open a textbook at school, leave university or TVET colleges, because we like to problematize higher learning, just go to basic aid.
Yeah.
And you open your textbook. You either see problematic white men, which they were during apartheid and colonialism, or you see black male heroes. You don't see black female heroes. That's the reality of the situation. So I personally do find it problematic when we have men problematizing women, because then I think, but from which position are you problematizing women? But nonetheless, lastly, on the issue of the word princess, because I think patriarchal has been unpacked quite deeply, but just the word princess on its own. Which gender is princess associated with? And why is there such a delicacy with that word? Because when you think of princess, you think of delicateness, you think of being vulnerable, and you think of a male hero coming to save you. Yeah. So just the word princess, guys, it's problematic. And we use that terminology and language from this age. We apply it and associate all the moms, by the way, in this room. When we say, hey, come princess, some of us might see it as, and it probably comes from a very good place, but we don't think about the implications and the consequences of using that word and only applying it to that specific gender. Because by the way, once that is internalized from that age, early childhood development phase, it's going to be very difficult to unlearn at our age and above. So that's just what I wanted to say.
So, I really wish we could go on for more or for longer. But but as I'm sitting and listening, I'm really asking myself the question, and I don't want responses, but that's just how I'm feeling. The road is long, and so long that this one area is a problem, from that area there's another problem, from that area there's another problem. So it's a web. I'm hoping that the conversation is not going to end here. I'm going to ask for closing comments, short, Sam, no brightness. Just if you would like, I mean there's a lot that I'm glad that it's being streamed live. I'm glad that there's going to be we can go back to watch and listen and in case we've missed something. If you, out of everything you've shared today, what is the one thing that you would like each of us to walk away with? And please keep it short. After that, Usparaz is going to, actually I'd like you to share why, because I know you were still at Penrith before, when this was conceptualized. Just in your closing remarks, in your vote of thanks, just say why, because it's layered, guys. It's really layered. I think we've just scratched the surface. I'm sitting here thinking, yes, I don't know it all. Yeah. And in the offering, I'm realizing that Ingati, also sometimes we dig to find problems. I always say I've been here for 9 years, and there is no white person who can be racist towards me, or not offer how I feel. There is no person who can. I was in a meeting once with a guy. I was the only female, and I was a young person, and the gentleman said, "Where you got that, hey?" With the assumption that Vuyo was taking the notes. I said back, "No, sorry, I'm not taking the notes." You know, so please, it's not. I understand it's deeper, and maybe I'm not trivializing it, but you need to take a stand, because a couple of years ago, there's a gentleman who used to work here. and we were sitting in the sexual harassment committee. And he walked out, and he walked out and said, Vuyo, please, if you feel violated by the way I speak to you, by the way I look at you, please can you tell me? And I really felt, Indoba akayazi, guys, because some of us have been taught in a certain way, and the men look at your diary the next day, you think, okay, that person's gonna be in the meeting, so I need to dress a certain way because they look somewhere else, you know?
Yeah.
So abanye they don't know, so please, we need to educate each other in a respectful manner, in a manner that, because the other person might not know. So we need to educate each other, we need to take our stand. It's a structure, but I'm reminded by something I read that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So what do we need to do to dismantle the house? Oops, sorry, maybe that first. So what do we need to do? Because if we talk about the spaces, especially higher education, the structure is there and oppressing the princesses that So what do we need to do? Because Omnum figure and then is added as a layer and expected to advance, you know? So we need to be patient with each other, we need to be human with each other, we need to be because we still have to coexist. So 1 minute.
Okay.
Last if I go home tonight and I think, shucks, Zandi, what did she say? What is the one thing that you'd like me to remember?
Cannot deliver on that, I'm sorry. But because, you know, I'm being triggered. A very important point, and this is not part of the 1 minute, please. Professor Manyosi, we should have had a moment of silence for him before the beginning, but I think we carry his grief in our spirits. The question of black excellence, I think we need to problematize it, because in an anti-black world, in an anti-black context, black excellence becomes black vulnerability. Because how does Utata become depressed, you know, after we've elevated him into that space? Where were we, the community? Because we are in a struggle. When we make advances, the enemy will always reverse them. So where were we when he was going through all of those things? And I get really uncomfortable when Sam speaks about we, the collective we. Because I don't think South Africa is a we have not reached the post-racial ideal, if that's what people want. So when we talk about we, building a future that it becomes a very, it's a serious trigger.
Sure.
And Dr. Oyewumi Oyoronke writes a very important text titled, What Gender is Motherhood? I think Chimamanda Ngozi needs to go and read that text, because from what is quoted here, you know, is very misleading and very limiting. You know, she's biologizing women. You know, we are not just our wombs, we are many other things. Now the 1 minute. I want to do a very short exercise, and this is, I pray people are gonna remember this. Quickly put your hand up if the name Masabata Liwate rings a bell. Okay, I see one hand. Deborah Machoba? No, one hand. No, Nombo Boy? One. Oshadi Mangena? Winnie Kware? Yeah, okay. The point I want to make right there, because I've already made the point that the state is the primary force of erasure. It dispenses other erasures. But within, I live with black people, so I talk about us in that sense. So within our space as black people, we have intramural erasures. For example, those women whose names I've just mentioned were some of the women who were very key. When you think Tsietsi Mashinini, the name Masabata Liwate should come, because she was arrested with Abotsietsi, right? When you think about Apla, Boko, the name Nomvo Boy should come, because she was in the camps, right? And when you think about Steve Biko, the name Debra Machoba should come, because she was in Sasso, 1960. So when you ask, the biggest question I want to ask is what informs, not what erasure is, because we all know what it is, but what informs that erasure? Why is it that today we are talking about women, but we don't know those women. What happened? And lastly, before I put the mic, 5 days ago, Mama Zondeni Sobukwe turned 91 years old. Nothing happened. There were no concerts, there were no big bashes, and it has been happening for the past 91 years. She has been erased. But when the name Nomzamo Winnie Mandela comes, we all know who she is. You know, for me, that is a form of, you know, intramural erasure. We do not know. Some people don't even know, did not even know that Mama Veronica Sobukwe was still alive. Yeah. She is, of course, the wife of Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe. Yeah. When people think about liberation, when people think about the struggle, the name Mandela comes in, the name Motasi Sulu comes in, but never Robert Sobukwe. And this is why today we have a woman who is not known completely. She's not even on, you know, there's this popular website, South African History Online. She's not there. We are busy as the Black House Collective developing a text that will go into that, because we're not just talkers, right? Yes. We are in the spaces to make things move. So for me, the most important thing is that erasure comes from the state, right? And we cannot end erasure if we don't problematize the state, because you are walking around with an ID that says man. It's the state that decided that. Nothing is going to change. So we must take our rage, our collective rage, to the state.
I think one thing that, okay, not one, but they're all interlinked. These things that are interlinked together that we need to walk away with is the fact that being trans, there's no one way of being trans, there's no one way of being a woman, right? And as much as I'm sitting here and people think that, you know what, it was a safe space and whatsoever, I'm not even gonna lie, I was cringing. So it was not a safe space, right? So we need to be mindful of the fact that we need to redefine what a safe space is. We need to give people an opportunity who are problematic. I hear the word problematic a lot. Yeah. And people who say they're problematic are actually problematic because they don't even understand what problematic is, right? So we need to give them that space to be problematic. There's a lot of things that we covered, a lot of silencing that happens and whatsoever. That silencing stems from the fact that you're always pointing fingers and saying you're being problematic. But you don't even understand that you're being problematic internally, because you're not offering someone else an opportunity to actually raise concerns and whatsoever. So there's no one way of being trans, there's no one way of being a woman, and definitely a safe space is something that we need to look at and offer opportunities to different people.
So, can I have a pre-minute as well? And so, my pre-minute really is about how the ANC, even prior to the state, has captured the resistance history and made it start in 1912. And the resistance of the people of this country started long before in the Cape, with the people who resisted valiantly, often successfully, against Jan van Riebeeck. Jan van Riebeeck actually writes of the Khoi as being a very militant people. And the idea that I was taught in history that people gave beads for cows, in the diary of Jan van Riebeeck, he actually calls for more arms because the Khois are making great strides and advances against him. And so it's for us to reclaim who are the liberators and where are we in that space, and where are our mothers and where are our fathers and where are our grandmothers, and to try and own the liberation in itself as us, as a collective. And then really about reimagining. When I became a feminist, now I'm in my minute. When I became a feminist, I think when I started understanding that in the world there were girls and boys, seemingly, and there were men and women. And when I understood gender, there were just things that were assigned to me on the basis of girlhood, like dishes. And I didn't get it. Like, you must wash the dishes. I'm like, but why? But you're a girl. And for me, you must sleep in a certain way. I'm like, why? Because you're a girl. And all these things for me, it wasn't sufficient enough of a reason. And I carried this, but I can't open my legs, and the only reason is because I'm a girl. And I carried this, what does it mean? What do these things mean? And when I found feminism, and I found feminist literature, there was finally something that said to me, there's something wrong with that. And I became a feminist because I understood there was something wrong with the way that I was raised to be viewed as a vehicle of domestication. And so I've been trying for myself to reimagine what kind of woman am I. And I'm definitely in the project of reimagining. This is one. I'm a woman that doesn't do the dishes because I don't want to. And I don't care if you don't want to marry me because I don't want to marry you.
Yes.
I'm a woman, unlike Chimamanda, who plans on never being pregnant. I don't like children. I don't like babies. Don't bring your babies to the office. I'm a nurturer. I don't want to hug your babies. I don't want to clean their snot. And that's, and for me, it's then reclaiming an identity of, I don't like that, and I don't want to do that, and I'd rather do this, and I'd rather drink wine, and I like being a whore, and all these other things that people try and demonize out of me, like to actually say I like having sex, and that's the kind of woman that I am, and to bring back the words that were taken out of my mouth, so to try and breathe life into myself as to this is who I am, and of course I can't define that for cis brightness. But this is me. I'm a wine-drinking, whore, non-dishwashing, loves reading, loves learning.
Brightness, don't erase my minutes.
I want the 3 minutes.
They're about to go in.
Ouch. I think from my side, all I want to say is that we need to be conscious about how we disable other people in our conversation. We need to be sensitive on how we silence other people. And I know sometimes we do that deliberately. Consciously, we say we are not aware that we are racist, whereas we are well aware that we are racist. But I think Sam touched on one other issue when you talked about my voice. And I always say the problem that we find ourselves in as women, there is always someone who tells us how to feel, how we are supposed to express ourselves. There is someone who's always censoring that this is not how you are supposed to feel. If you say you are in pain, in fact, I was reading something about erasure, and the worst form of erasure is when a woman is silenced. And that goes back to the issues of mental illness that we are experiencing and we are reading about on a day-to-day basis. There is a lot of social ill that we are not even engaging on. And there is a lot of labeling. As black women, we are called this angry black woman. It's okay to be angry. Because you can't tell me not to be angry because you don't understand what I'm experiencing every day. Sam, I think you've touched on the case of being tired. I am also tired. But again, when I'm saying I'm tired, I don't mean I'm actually giving up. But I'm acknowledging that the state of mind and frame that I'm in, it says I need to rejuvenate, reconnect, restore myself. You've touched on the issue about 1912 and ANC. It's about time we write our own stories. There is no one who can write our stories better than ourselves. And it's unfortunate when we write our story, we write the wrongs that we experience on a day-to-day basis. It's about time that we become intentional about what we write. We need to celebrate women. And when we talk about intentional, I'm finding a trend where only we are reactive as women, where we'll normally say, but this committee does not have women. If you're going to go to a gathering, be intentional, check the program. Do they have women? If they don't have, demand that women are there. It cannot be business as usual.
Look, all I want to say is two things. One, I just feel that a girl or a woman should never be the reason for anything. So, when I say because you are a girl, that should never be the reason for anything. Because you are a girl, you should clean. Because you are a girl, you should cook. Because you are a girl, you should get married. Because you are a girl, you should... And the story just continues. And I do disagree simply because I come from a different political school of thought as to the first panelist. It is not attached to race. It is a pure gender-based inequality that we experience as white women with white men in particular, right? So we are raised as young girls from a young age to say, you will get married. If you are divorced as a woman, it is a problem. Why? Because you are a woman, not because you are divorced, right? So all I want to say is because you are a girl, because you are a woman, because you are female should not be a reason for anything. It's not intellectual, it's not spiritual, it's just simply not acceptable. It's ikaka, you must distance yourself from it. Finally, I want to say that there's this immense pressure, and I even felt it, and I was triggered as well. There's this immense pressure that as women activists, female activists, we need to be liked. You must be likable. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to share my views. I'm here to share my school of thought, which might differ to yours, by the way. So all I want to say is, please, as you go forward in your activism, do not feel that pressure to be liked, because that is not going to help us when we're trying to transform any structural imbalance, trying to transform any problematic space. You don't need to be liked, you don't need to feel that pressure of likability just based on your gender. It's not necessary. So Gwebani, go forward, yes.
2 more minutes. We're going to gather this panelists' Facebook, Twitter handles, hashtag no, and they'll be available on the Camera Facebook page. Last news for us.
Good evening, everyone. I'll be very, very quick. So, firstly, just in terms of why we decided to have this conversation in Women's Month and also in Diversity Month, right? Ulove More, historically known as Asonele. She chooses to be called Love More. Was talking about how women we have this homogeneous identity that people look at, and so we wanted to have to look at the ways we collect these recollections of women's stories and contrast it to how it was generally framed, and make meaning as to what kind of spaces do we want to be in. I think the second one that we need to explore is what really becomes a safe space. But in making meaning of what it means to be a woman that exists in society in a post-democratic context, in an institution of higher learning, this type of conversation was essential for us to not enter it at a position whereby we feel like we know and assume. So thank you so much for the educational space that you have created here. It is true when they say that most of education happens really outside of the classroom. Thank you so much to the audience members as well for your contributions, for your bravery and your courage in sharing your stories as well, and for being part of the conversation. I understand that these conversations are often quite triggering and uncomfortable for some of us. And thank you so much, Ms Vuyo, for holding this conversation with so much dignity. And for being disciplined for the most of it, and disciplined in a good way. So I just want to make 2 announcements. So the first one is we are needing to please ensure that everyone has written their name on the register. We need this for data capturing purposes as well, so that we can further these conversations and know what kind of people we should bring into these spaces. The second thing is on Monday, the 6th of August, we'll be Kenright will be having Ms Vuyo Bongela from Timali, and University of Pretoria respectively, and she'll be talking about her PhD project which looks at the widows of the Marikana workers. So she applies a lot of decolonial theory into her work, and as the university which is moving towards using decolonial concepts, I think that will be a very interesting conversation to be part of. And as I land, just very lastly, taking into account that some colleagues have brought in glasses and sauces, please do take them out. Thank you so much.